Okay, guys, here we are to talk about the offer or the purchase contract for residential real estate. So this first page here is a notice to the buyer on certain key highlights that they want you to make sure that you are aware of as you move through the transaction over likely the next month. But we want to make sure that the buyer's legal name is correct here when we're going over this, and that the seller's legal name is correct here. The address also, the property location information all needs to be correct. Then when we have a number entered into the full purchase price, that is what the total offer amount would be. Next in line would be the earnest amount. That would be put up to open escrow and to be put up in terms of damages should the buyer breach the contract. Next, we generally see what the down payment amount would be. And then next, we see what the final financing amount would be. If there's any extra breakdowns, we see some of that here. The earnest money will be decided if it's a personal check or a wire. And generally, I in 12 years have never had to go into the broker's trust account. It's always going directly to the escrow company. The close of escrow here will be when the buyer is trying to take possession of the property or trying to take ownership. Possession can be a different date. So that possession date, if we have a post-possession or pre-possession or anything like that, we might see a different date come up there. We have a bunch of different addendums that might be a part of the transaction based on what the property is. So we'll be able to see what those look like here. Most offers will have the seller compensation addendum attached at this point. And then everything else is, kind of dependent on property specific things. So this is generally what goes with in a sale. Here is where the buyer gets to say whether or not they want the fridge, washer, dryer, or any other personal property not listed up here that they want included in the sale. So anything that would be leased, like if an owner leased a water softener, that would not be included. So number 2 here, section 2, is our financing section. So if somebody is getting a mortgage, this is where it's going to reference the pre-qualification included with the offer. There's going to be a loan contingency that they have some outs should they not be able to get a loan by 3 days before we close, and then they deliver that notice. They need to get that without prior to document conditions. And then if they can't, that would be what's called an unfulfilled loan contingency. They can get that earnest money back if they get an unfulfilled loan contingency. Interest rate necessary funds are going to be entirely dependent on the lender and what that loan program says. So we don't have a whole lot of control as the seller side on what that buyer's rate and funds procedures are. So we do get loan status updates from the lender regardless of buyer or seller side to make sure that we know that that lender is on track with this transaction and they're not dropping the ball on their end. So the buyer is required to do a loan application within 3 days of the contract being accepted and submit that to a lender. And then they're going to be processing through that during escrow. So the lender has to submit a loan estimate to the buyer within 10 days. Here's where we see which type of financing the buyer is choosing and if they're going to be asking the seller to cover any closing costs for them. Any changes to the buyer's loan situation, they're supposed to notify the seller immediately. And if there is financing, 9 out of 10 times there will be an appraisal. And that appraisal generally comes after the inspection period. So appraisal fees generally are paid for by the buyer, again, negotiable. Here's where we see the title company that's handling the transaction. They'll be the one taking care of how title gets recorded, creating the deed. They'll be preparing title commitment and title insurance. They'll be pulling up any deed restrictions, any of that. Any instructions for title will have to be in writing, signed by everybody for that to supersede the contract that they originally have. They'll be dealing with tax prorations. They'll be releasing earnest money in the event of a dispute. And they'll be looking up any assessments and fees and prorating those based on the close of escrow date. The number 4 here, disclosures. Sellers are required to provide disclosure statements to the buyers within 3 days. If anything changes to those disclosures during the transaction, they are required to be updated and re-delivered as well. They also have to call for a 5-year insurance claim history, provide that to the buyer. We have to disclose if the sellers are foreign nationals, and there is some extra tax money that has to be withheld at title. If the house was built prior to 1978, we have lead-based paint. we have a signature here, depending on if it was 78 or either before or after 78. Then we have, if you're, in an unincorporated area of the county, there's an affidavit of disclosure. And then, of course, we kind of touched on this earlier, any changes to any disclosures do need to be redisclosed. So the condition of the premises, the both sides agree that it's being sold in present physical condition and should convey in largely the same physical condition. So if things break in the meantime, they need to be fixed for closing. There are certain things that survive 150 days immediately after close of escrow. So keep track of what's happening and which repairs you've made, and they should be working for those 5 months afterwards. The inspection period, due diligence here, generally we see 10 days. Sometimes this is shorter, sometimes it's longer, but this is the time a buyer gets to go in and really dig into the property, figure out if they're comfortable with the condition. So this is where, if you're worried about square footage, if you're worried about termites, if you're worried about flood insurance, if you're worried about the sewer connection, if you're worried about swimming pool rules, any of it, it's all based on the buyer's comfort level, and this is their opportunity to dig in. Once they've done that, just before their inspection period ends, they can deliver what we call a BINSR, which is a buyer's inspection notice. They can either disapprove of the property and cancel the contract, they could ask for repairs, or they could accept it with no repairs needed. So they have those three options. If they deliver something that says, I want repairs made, the seller has 5 days then to respond on if they're going to be repairing things or if they're going to be offering a concession or whatever that might look like. And we can go through what all of those options are. Here's where the buyer would indicate whether or not they want a home warranty plan, who would be ordering it, how much it's going to be for, if there's extra coverage, and then who would be paying for that at closing. So the seller does have to make the property available for walkthroughs, for inspections, appraisals, things like that. We do have to report if we are, foreign people are involved. We do have to report all of that. Should there be a problem with the contract, we do have a cure period notice, and then we would go to a breach of contract should the cure period not get resolved. So that cure period is a 3-day notice, and if the whatever is wrong that we're curing for is not corrected on either side, the party that did the curing can cancel the contract. So if it's the seller cures the buyer, this is where the buyer's earnest money can be at risk. If the buyer cures the seller, the buyer can get their earnest money back and walk away. That would be the breach of contract. We do have to go through the alternative dispute resolution and agrees to mediation before you go to arbitration. If we need to write in any additional terms here, then if anything should happen to the property as far as a risk of loss, if the damage is greater than 10% of the purchase price, then everybody can reevaluate and the seller can cancel the contract. If it's less than 10%, the seller just needs to fix it. Compensation is going to be set up on different forms and part of this negotiation. So keep that in mind. When we're counting days, it's the next 12 o'clock a.m. starts day one. When we're calculating days and time periods. The seller can accept backup offers. So keep that in mind if you're, trying to push hard on inspections and there's another offer in place. They may choose to go with a different offer. So know of all the nuances and moving pieces. This, of course, is your choice, your comfort level, and all the things. We can give you advice, but it's ultimately your decision to go forth and buy the house. And then here is the buyer's decision, and then the seller's decision to sell. Terms of acceptance here, this is how much time you give the seller to agree to the offer or respond in a counter. And then here's the agent working on behalf of the buyer, and here's the agent working on behalf of the seller.